I regret marrying you. You'll never be good enough for someone with my potential." Michael delivered these words with the same cold detachment he used when critiquing my cooking or commenting on my wardrobe choices. My name is Elena, and at 32 I was standing in our kitchen, watching my husband of 5 years methodically dismantle my self-worth while sipping his morning coffee. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The argument had started over something trivial. I'd forgotten to pick up his dry cleaning, but had quickly evolved into his favorite topic, my shortcomings. I looked at him across our marble-topped island, taking in his perfectly pressed shirt, his expensive watch, his carefully styled hair that he spent more time on than I did mine. 5 years of marriage, and he still acted like he'd done me a favor by choosing me. "I see," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper as I continued preparing breakfast. My hands trembled slightly, but I kept moving. This wasn't the first time he'd said something like this, just the most direct. Michael worked as a corporate attorney at one of the city's most prestigious firms, Hartman and Reed. At 36, he was the youngest senior associate on track to make partner by 40. I managed a small bookstore downtown called Wonderland Books, something he'd initially found quaint, but now referred to as my little hobby job. When we'd met at a friend's gallery opening, he'd seemed charmed by my passion for literature and art. Now that passion was just another target for his criticism. "I mean, look at you," he continued, gesturing vaguely at my appearance. "The wives of the other partners all have careers or at least proper social standing. What am I supposed to say when they ask what you do? Oh, she sells books." He laughed, but there was no warmth in it. Patricia's wife is a pediatric surgeon. David's wife runs that nonprofit that's always in the social pages. And what does Michael Foster's wife do? Recommends novels to college students and retirees. I placed his perfectly cooked eggs in front of him, precisely 7 minutes, the way he insisted they be prepared. "Too runny again," he sighed without even tasting them. "I don't understand why you can't get this right after 5 years." "I'll do better next time," I said automatically, the words so familiar they required no thought. This was our routine. He criticized, I apologized. He demanded, I accommodated. A perfectly choreographed dance of slow emotional erosion. "The Harrington dinner is next Saturday," he reminded me, scrolling through his phone. "Wear something appropriate. Nothing from that vintage shop you like. I need you to look like you belong there." Belong there. As if I was an accessory that needed to match his outfit, his career, his life. I remembered when he used to introduce me proudly, listening attentively as I spoke about books or art or my travels before we met. Now he cut me off mid-sentence at social gatherings, redirecting conversations away from my boring interests. "I bought a new dress," I offered. "The blue one from Nordstrom you approved." He nodded absently. "Fine. And do something with your hair. Something elegant. Ask Vivian for her stylist's number." Vivian was the wife of the senior partner, a woman who'd never spoken more than 3 sentences to me at any firm event, but whom Michael constantly held up as the gold standard of what a successful man's wife should be. Perfectly highlighted blonde hair, tennis-toned arms, charity committee memberships, and a permanently pleasant smile that never quite reached her eyes. "I'll text her today," I lied. I had no intention of contacting Vivian. As Michael finished his coffee, he glanced at his watch, a graduation gift from his father that probably cost more than 3 months of my bookstore salary. "I have an early meeting with the Westbrook team. Don't forget to call the landscaper about the back garden. It's embarrassing. And please wear something presentable to work today. You never know who might stop by the bookstore." By who, he meant his colleagues or their wives, who occasionally patronized my store as a courtesy to Michael. These visits were always followed by his detailed critique of how I'd presented myself and the store. After he left, I sat alone at our kitchen island, surrounded by the expensive appliances we rarely used and the designer decor that never felt like home. 5 years ago, I'd moved into Michael's waterfront condo, and he'd systematically replaced or stored away everything I'd brought with me. My colorful throw pillows, my collection of vintage art books, my grandmother's hand-painted ceramics, all deemed not cohesive with the aesthetic. Now the space looked like it belonged in an architectural magazine, perfectly appointed, expensively furnished, and completely devoid of personality. I walked to the large windows overlooking Elliott Bay and pressed my palm against the cool glass. Seattle's skyline was partially obscured by morning fog, mirroring the haze that had gradually settled over my sense of self. When had I become this person? This shadow who apologized for existing, who carefully weighed every word before speaking, who had lost touch with almost everyone she once cared about because they weren't suitable connections for Michael's career trajectory. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister, Claire, the only person from my former life Michael hadn't managed to completely push away, though not for lack of trying. "Your sister is exhausting," he'd say after her visits. "So dramatic, so ordinary. Still on for coffee tomorrow? Miss your face. Need to tell you about my new gallery showing." Claire was an artist, another source of Michael's disapproval. "Hobby careers run in the family, I see," he'd commented once, loud enough for her to hear. I smiled despite myself. We'd been meeting, secretly for months now, telling Michael I was attending a book club. The small rebellion felt both terrifying and necessary, like coming up for air after being underwater too long. "Wouldn't miss it," I texted back. "So proud of you." I walked to our bedroom to get ready for work. Our walk-in closet was divided, unequally. Michael's designer suits, expensive shoes, and casual wear occupied 2/3 of the space. My carefully curated wardrobe, selected mostly by Michael or with his approval in mind, took up the remainder. In the back corner, hidden behind winter coats, was a small wooden box containing the few items I'd saved from my former life. A worn copy of Jane Eyre that my father had given me before he died. A bracelet made of sea glass from my childhood best friend. A small sketchbook where I occasionally still drew when Michael worked late. And a small envelope with $2,700 in cash, tips from the bookstore that I'd been secretly saving, one $20 bill at a time. I touched the box briefly, then closed the closet door. I had a bookstore to open, customers who valued my opinions on literature, a small space where I still felt like myself. And tomorrow, coffee with Claire. Michael's words echoed in my head as I dressed in a presentable outfit that wouldn't embarrass him. "You'll never be good enough for someone like me." For the first time, a different thought surfaced in response. Maybe I don't want to be. The next morning at Wonderland Books, I unlocked the front door precisely at 9 a.m. The familiar smell of paper, coffee, and the lavender sachets I tucked between displays welcomed me like an old friend. This space, with its creaking hardwood floors, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and mismatched reading chairs, was my sanctuary. The only place Michael hadn't completely redesigned according to his tastes. Not that he hadn't tried. "The aesthetic is confused," he'd complained during one of his rare visits. "It lacks cohesion. You should hire a proper designer." But I'd held firm, explaining that the eclectic, cozy atmosphere was part of the store's charm. It was perhaps the only argument I'd won in our marriage, and only because he'd ultimately decided the bookstore was too insignificant to bother with. "Morning, Elena." Mia, my assistant manager, called from behind the register where she was setting up for the day. At 23, she had the energy and optimism I remembered once having myself. "The new shipment of Ishiguro novels arrived, and I've already sorted the special orders." "You're amazing," I replied, hanging my coat on the vintage rack by the door. "Coffee ready?" "Just brewed." And Theo brought muffins again. She nodded toward our regular customer, a retired English professor who spent most mornings in the corner, Armchair, reading poetry and bringing baked goods that were his excuse to linger. "Good morning, Theo," I called, earning a wave and smile that contained more warmth than I'd experienced at home in months. The morning passed in a comfortable rhythm of helping customers, unpacking shipments, and arranging the new display for an upcoming author event. Around noon, the bells above the door chimed, and I looked up from the register to see Claire bouncing in, her curly hair wild as always, paint splattered on her jeans despite our coffee date. "I'm early, I know," she said, wrapping me in a hug that smelled of turpentine and the essential oils she always wore. "But I finished the commission early and couldn't wait to see you." "I'm glad," I said, returning her embrace. "Let me grab my coat." "Actually," she whispered, "can we talk here? The coffee shop might be too public." My stomach tightened. "What's wrong?" Claire glanced at Mia, who tactfully moved to help a customer. "Not here. Do you have an office?" I led her to the small room in the back that served as both office and storage space. Claire closed the door behind us and turned to me with an intensity in her eyes that immediately put me on alert. "Elena, I've been debating whether to show you this for days." She pulled out her phone, scrolled briefly, then handed it to me. This was posted in a private social media group for Seattle artists. Someone was asking if anyone knew this attorney who was hitting on her at a gallery opening last week. I stared at the screen, which showed a slightly blurry photo of Michael with his arm around a young woman with long dark hair. They were standing close, too close, and he was smiling down at her with an expression I hadn't seen directed at me in years. "Maybe it's innocent," Claire said softly. "Maybe it's just a client, or—" "It's not," I interrupted, my voice strangely calm. The woman was wearing a vintage-style dress with embroidered flowers, exactly the type of clothing Michael always criticized me for liking. Her hair was wild and curly, like mine had been before he'd insisted I straighten it for professionalism. She looked like me from 5 years ago. "There's more," Claire said gently. "Keep scrolling." The next photo showed them outside, Michael helping her into his car, the car he'd refused to let me drive because it was too expensive for errands. "When was this?" I asked, still in that eerily calm voice. "Last Thursday. The night he said he had that dinner with the Westbrook clients. Thursday. The night he'd come home at 2 a.m., smelling of unfamiliar perfume, which he'd explained away as having been seated next to a client's wife with excessive taste and fragrance." I handed the phone back to Claire, my hand steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. "Thank you for showing me. Elena, I'm so sorry. I debated telling you, but no, you did the right thing." I stood up and smoothed my skirt, a beige pencil skirt Michael had approved as appropriate for work. "Would you still like to get coffee?" Claire's eyes widened. "You're not upset?" A laugh escaped me, sharp and foreign to my own ears. "I'm not sure what I am right now, but I know I could use that coffee." As we walked the 2 blocks to Raindrop Cafe, Claire kept shooting me concerned glances. "You're scaring me a little with how calm you are," she finally said as we claimed a table by the window. "I'm scaring myself," I admitted, wrapping my hands around the warm ceramic mug. "But honestly, I think I've suspected something for months. The late nights, the sudden client emergencies, the weekends at the office." "That bastard," Claire muttered, stirring her latte with unnecessary force. "After all his talk about standards and how you need to be the perfect wife." "It's not even the potential affair that's getting to me," I said slowly, realizing the truth of it as I spoke. "It's that she looks exactly like who I used to be before he started changing me." "She does, doesn't she?" Claire studied me. "What are you going to do?" I took a sip of coffee, considering. "I don't know. Confront him, I suppose. And then—" "What? If he admits it?" The question hung between us, heavy with implications. What would I do? Forgive him? Try to save a marriage that had been slowly killing me for years? The thought made something inside me shrivel. I don't know, I repeated softer this time. Claire reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Whatever you decide, I'm here. But Elena, this might be your wake-up call. He's not just controlling and belittling you. He's a hypocrite. I know, and honestly, you've been disappearing for years. The Elena I knew was vibrant and creative and stood up for herself. She wouldn't have tolerated a fraction of what Michael dishes out daily. Her words stung because they were true. I had been disappearing, piece by piece, replaced by this hollow version who sought approval from a man who would never give it. Speaking of creativity, I said, desperate to change the subject before tears threatened. Tell me about your gallery showing. Claire's face lit up, but her eyes remained concerned. It's happening next month at the Finney Gallery. I'm showing my new series on urban isolation. Actually, she hesitated. One of the pieces was inspired by you. By me? She nodded, pulling out her tablet and finding a photograph of a painting. It showed a woman standing in front of a wall of mirrors, but each reflection showed a slightly different version of her, growing dimmer, smaller, more faded in each successive image. I call it disappearing act, she said softly. I stared at the image, my throat tight. It's beautiful, I managed, and painful. That's what good art should be, she replied, putting the tablet away. Elena, come to the opening. Michael never attends my amateur showings anyway. It'll be good for you to be around creative people again. I'll try, I promised, knowing Michael would find some reason to object. Back at the bookstore, I moved through the afternoon in a daze, mechanically helping customers while my mind spun with the images Claire had shown me. Not just the photos of Michael with that woman, but the painting, that haunting visualization of my slow erasure. At 5:30, I was shelving new arrivals when Mia approached with a small package. Special delivery came for you, she said. From Parsons Fine Jewelry. I frowned, taking the small box. I hadn't ordered anything from Parsons. Their pieces were far beyond my budget, and Michael controlled our joint finances meticulously. Inside was a platinum bracelet with a small diamond charm and a card that read, "For my loving wife. Sorry about this morning. See you at home. M. Gilt Jewelry." I'd received enough over the years to recognize the pattern. Michael says something cruel. Michael feels momentary remorse, or more likely, fear that he's pushed too far. Michael buys expensive gift instead of apologizing directly. Wow, that's gorgeous, Mia commented, glancing over my shoulder. Special occasion? No, I said, returning the bracelet to its box. Just my husband being my husband. Her smile faltered slightly. She'd met Michael only a handful of times, but had developed an impressively accurate read on our dynamic. Well, it's beautiful anyway, she said diplomatically. I placed the box in my purse and continued shelving, but my movements had become mechanical, automatic. Like my entire life with Michael. A series of prescribed actions designed to avoid conflict, to maintain the peace, to be good enough in the eyes of a man who would never truly be satisfied. By the time I locked up the store at 7Y, my initial shock had crystallized into something harder. I stood on the sidewalk, watching evening descend on the city. Lights flickering on in office buildings, people hurrying home to loved ones, the regular rhythm of life continuing around me while mine seemed frozen in amber. I didn't want to go. Home. The thought surprised me with its clarity and force. I did not want to return to that sterile condo and pretend I hadn't seen those photos. I didn't want to accept the bracelet and play the role of grateful wife. I didn't want to cook dinner according to Michael's exacting specifications and listen to more critiques about my failings. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to truly feel the weight of my unhappiness, not just as a vague discomfort, to be pushed aside, but as a legitimate emotion that deserved acknowledgement. I was profoundly, bone-deep unhappy in my marriage, and Michael's potential affair wasn't the cause. It was merely the final confirmation of what I'd known, but refused to admit. But what next? The question loomed large as I finally started walking toward the bus stop. Tonight, at least, I knew I couldn't maintain the facade. Tonight, something would have to give. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Working late. Don't wait up for dinner. Did you get my gift?" The lie was so casual, so effortless. How many other late nights had been spent with other women? How many client dinners had been dates? And more importantly, why did I suddenly care less about his infidelity than about reclaiming myself? I typed back a response. "We need to talk when you get home." 3 dots appeared immediately, then disappeared. Then, "Everything okay?" "No," I replied simply. "It's not." I put my phone away and boarded the bus, watching the familiar streets roll by as I headed back to a home that had never truly been mine. Whatever happened tonight, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The woman who got off this bus would not be the same one who had meekly accepted Michael's cruelty this morning. I arrived home to a dark, silent condo. The emptiness felt different. Tonight, not lonely, but expectant, as if the space itself was holding its breath. I flicked on a single lamp in the living room, casting long shadows across Michael's carefully curated furniture. Everything gleamed with expensive perfection. The Italian leather sofa, the glass coffee table, the abstract art he'd bought not because he loved it, but because his firm's interior designer had recommended the artist as up-and-coming. I slipped off my shoes and padded to the kitchen, where I poured myself a glass of the red wine Michael kept for dinner parties, a vintage I wasn't normally allowed to open, just for myself. Tonight, I didn't care. I took the glass to the floor-to-ceiling windows and stood looking out at the Seattle skyline, the city lights blurred by a fine mist of rain. The bracelet in my purse felt like it was burning a hole through the leather. I took it out and placed it on the kitchen counter, where the diamonds caught the light and scattered it across the marble. 5 years ago, I would have been thrilled by such a gift. Now I only saw it for what it was, a transaction. My continued compliance in exchange for occasional material compensation. I pulled out my phone and opened the browser, finding myself typing signs of emotional abuse before I'd even consciously decided to do so. The list that appeared made my stomach clench: constant criticism and belittling. Controlling behavior regarding appearance, social connections, and daily activities. Creating isolation from friends and family. Making the victim feel they're never good enough. Financial control. Monitoring movements and communications. Gaslighting. Denying or twisting reality. I sank onto a bar stool, my legs suddenly unsteady. It was like reading a checklist of my marriage. Each item resonated with painful clarity, calling to mind specific instances, patterns that had become so normalized I'd stopped seeing them. The criticism. That haircut makes your face look round. Can't you speak more softly in public? Your laugh is too loud. The control. That dress is inappropriate. Why would you want to waste time with those people? I've scheduled your hair appointment for Thursday. The isolation. Your mother calls too often. Claire is a bad influence. Those friends from college are holding you back professionally. The financial control, our joint accounts that I couldn't access without explaining every purchase. The allowance for household expenses that I had to account for down to the penny. I took a long sip of wine, allowing myself to truly feel the weight of this realization. This wasn't a rough patch. This wasn't a communication issue. This was a systematic dismantling of my identity, my independence, my very self. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Headed home now. Still want to talk? I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my photo gallery and scrolled back through the years, watching the slow transformation of myself in pictures. 5 years ago, hair curly and wild, vintage dress, bright smile, standing with Claire at an art exhibition. 4 years ago, hair slightly tamed, more conservative dress, still smiling, at a dinner with Michael's colleagues. 3 years ago, straight hair, designer dress Michael had selected, subdued smile, at a firm function. 2 years ago, highlighted hair, Vivian stylist's recommendation. Another firm-approved outfit, practiced smile that didn't reach my eyes. The progression was so obvious now. The gradual erasure of the woman I had been, replaced by Michael's version of who I should be. "What happened to me?" I whispered to the empty apartment. My phone buzzed again. 20 minutes away. We can talk. Over dinner, still I didn't respond. I set down my wine glass and walked to our bedroom, drawn to that hidden box of treasures. I pulled it from its hiding place and sat cross-legged on the floor, opening it carefully. The sea glass bracelet caught the light, its blues and greens, reminding me of beach days with friends before Michael had decided beaches were too sandy and bad for the skin. I slipped it on, the feeling both foreign and achingly familiar. My father's copy of Jane Eyre fell open to a passage he'd underlined. "I am no bird, and no net ensnares me. I am a free human being with an independent will." I traced the words, remembering my father's voice reading them to me when I was young. "Never forget this, Ellie," he'd said, using the nickname Michael had later deemed childish and banned. "You are not a bird to be caged, not even in a golden cage." But that was exactly what had happened. I'd been placed in a beautiful, expensive cage and had gradually forgotten how to use my wings. The sketchbook was next. I opened it to find drawings from the early days of our relationship, quick studies of Seattle scenes, abstract patterns, even a few portraits of Michael when I'd still found his intensity attractive rather than oppressive. The later pages showed fewer completed works, more abandoned sketches, as if my creativity itself had slowly been stifled. And then the cash, my secret rebellion, my insurance policy, though I hadn't admitted that to myself until now. $20 bills tucked away from bookstore tips, creating a small fund that Michael knew nothing about. It wasn't much, but it was mine. As I returned these treasures to their box, my phone rang. Michael's face appeared on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later. "Starting to worry. Everything okay?" I placed the box on our bed and went to the walk-in closet, surveying. The neat rows of Michael-approved clothing. At the very back, behind winter coats and formal wear, hung a garment bag containing the few items I hadn't been able to part with from my pre-Michael life. I unzipped it to find a vintage emerald green dress with embroidered flowers, similar to what the woman in the photos had been wearing. Without analyzing my actions, I changed into the dress, its familiar fabric settling around me like an old friend. I went to the bathroom and washed my face clean of the subtle makeup Michael preferred. I ruffled my straight hair, trying to coax back some of its natural wave. The woman in the mirror looked like a strange hybrid. Part Elena now, part Elena then, but her eyes held something I hadn't seen in years: determination. My phone rang again. This time I answered. "Elena? Where are you? Why aren't you responding?" Michael's voice held that edge it got when things weren't going according to his plan. "I'm home," I said simply. "You had me worried. You know I don't like it when you're cryptic. What's this about needing to talk?" "I think it's better in person. How far away are you?" "Just getting into the elevator now. I'll see you soon then." I ended the call before he could ask more questions and returned to the living room, taking my position by the windows. The bracelet he'd sent still sat on the counter, sparkling accusingly in the low light. What exactly did I want from this confrontation? Did I want him to confess, to apologize, to promise to change? The questions tumbled through my mind, but one clear thought emerged. I wanted to feel like myself again. Everything else was secondary. The door opened and Michael entered, his designer suit still perfectly pressed despite his claimed long day at work. He set down his briefcase and loosened his tie, a practiced movement that once would have made my heart flutter with attraction. There you are. What's with the mysterious... He stopped abruptly, taking in my appearance. What are you wearing? Where did that come from? My closet, I replied calmly. Behind the winter coats. His eyes narrowed. I thought we donated all those old clothes. You thought wrong. The shift in his expression was subtle, a slight tightening around the mouth, a coolness entering his eyes. What's going on, Elena? You're acting strange, and you haven't mentioned the bracelet. He nodded toward the counter. Did you like it? It's beautiful, I said honestly. You have excellent taste in guilt gifts. His posture stiffened. Excuse? Me? The bracelet. It's a guilt gift, isn't it? For saying you regret marrying me this morning. Or maybe for something else entirely. I don't know what you're talking about. He moved to the kitchen, pouring himself a scotch. If you didn't like it, you could just say so instead of whatever this passive-aggressive display is. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. How was your late meeting? I asked. Exhausting. The Westbrook merger is a nightmare. He sipped his drink, leaning against the counter with practiced casualness. Is that what this is about? You're upset I'm working late again? I'm not upset about you working late, I said carefully. I'm upset about you lying about working late. He froze momentarily, then recovered. What are you talking about? I saw the photos, Michael. What photos? His voice remained even, but a muscle twitched in his jaw, his tell when he was caught off. Guard, you and a young woman, at the Belltown Gallery opening last Thursday, the night you said you were having dinner with the Westbrook clients. He set down his glass with deliberate control. You're having me followed now? No. Someone recognized you and posted the photos online. They were wondering who the handsy lawyer was. Claire saw them. Of course Claire is involved, he muttered. Your sister never approved of me. Don't deflect. Who is she? He sighed, rubbing his temples as if I were giving him a headache. She's just an art consultant I met with about pieces for the office. It was work-related. Is that why you were helping her into your car at midnight? His expression hardened. You're spying on me now? This is exactly the kind of paranoid behavior that makes it difficult to be married to you, Elena. The constant neediness, the insecurity. Stop. I held up my hand, surprising both of us with the firmness in my voice. Don't turn this around on me. Not this time. We stared at each other across the room, the air between us charged with an unfamiliar tension. I had never interrupted him before, never directly challenged his attempts to shift blame. She looks like me, I said softly. Like I used to look before you started changing me. The vintage dress, the curly hair, the free spirit. Is that what attracted you to her? Finding someone who reminds you of the woman you originally married, before you stripped away everything that made her herself? Michael's face flushed with anger. This is ridiculous. I'm not having this conversation when you're clearly determined to believe the worst. Did you sleep with her? For God's sake, Elena. It's a simple question. He picked up his scotch again, draining the glass. No, I did not sleep with her. I met with her about art for the firm. There was a gallery opening nearby. We stopped. I gave her a ride home. End of story. I studied his face, trying to determine if he was telling the truth. But the realization that hit me was startling. I didn't actually care. Whether he had slept with this woman or not was suddenly irrelevant compared to the larger truth I was facing. I don't believe you, I said quietly. But that's not even the point. Then what is the point of this dramatic confrontation? He gestured at my dress. The costume change. The accusatory questions. I wrapped my arms around myself, feeling the soft fabric of my old dress, remembering who I used to be before I'd met him. The point is that I've spent 5 years trying to be good enough for you, and I finally realized tonight that I never will be. Not because there's something wrong with me, but because you need me to feel inadequate. You need me small and uncertain and grateful for your approval. Michael's expression shifted from anger to something closer to panic. This wasn't following the usual script. I wasn't backing down, apologizing, or dissolving into tears. "You're being dramatic," he said dismissively, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "If this is about this morning, I apologized. I bought you the bracelet." "That's not an apology. That's a transaction." I moved to the counter and picked up the bracelet, its weight suddenly repulsive in my hand. "And I'm not for sale anymore." The words left my mouth. I felt something shift inside me. A fundamental realignment. As if pieces that had been out of place for years suddenly clicked into position. I wasn't just confronting Michael about potential infidelity. I was reclaiming myself. Michael stared at me as if I'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. The familiar tactics, dismissal, deflection, blame, had failed him, leaving him momentarily speechless. It was perhaps the first time in our marriage that I'd seen him genuinely caught off guard. "You're upset," he finally said, regaining his composure. "I understand. We've both had a long day. Why don't we table this discussion until tomorrow when we're both more reasonable?" "I am being reasonable," I replied, setting the bracelet back on the counter. "Possibly for the first time in years." He sighed heavily, adopting the patient tone he used when explaining complex legal matters to me. "Elena, you're clearly emotional right now. You're making accusations, dressing up in old clothes, creating drama over a work meeting. Stop patronizing me." The words came out calm but firm. "I'm not a child having a tantrum. I'm a woman who's finally seeing her marriage clearly." His expression hardened. "And what exactly do you think you're seeing?" "The truth. That you've spent our entire relationship systematically breaking me down, criticizing my appearance, my interests, my friends, isolating me from anyone who reminds me of who I used to be, controlling every aspect of my life from our finances to what I'm allowed to wear." "Allowed?" he scoffed. "I've never forced you to do anything. You've always had choices. Have I? What happens when I make choices you don't approve of? You withdraw. You criticize. You make me regret daring to have an independent thought." He loosened his tie further, a flash of genuine anger crossing his face. "So now I'm the villain in your story, the controlling monster? After everything I've done for you? The lifestyle I've provided? The guidance I've given you?" "Guidance," I repeated softly. "Is that what you call it?" We stood in silence for a long moment, the gulf between us palpable. I could almost see the calculations happening behind his eyes. Which approach would work best to bring me back in line? "I think you should stay with your sister tonight," he finally said. "You're clearly not in a rational state of mind, and I have the Harrington brief to prepare for tomorrow." It was so predictable. When he couldn't control the narrative, he removed himself from it. Created distance, made it clear that my emotions were an inconvenience to his important work. "I'm not leaving," I said. "This is as much my home as yours." He laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. "Is it? Whose name is on the mortgage? Who pays the property taxes? The maintenance fees?" He gestured around the apartment. "Who purchased everything in this place?" There it was, the financial control laid bare. The reminder that in his mind, I was essentially a guest in his life, permitted to stay only as long as I remained compliant. "You're right," I said, surprising him again. "This isn't my home. It never has been. It's just the place where I've been slowly disappearing for 5 years." I turned away from him and walked to the guest room, closing the door quietly behind me. I heard him call my name once, then silence. A moment later, the sound of ice clinking in a glass, followed by the familiar creak of his office chair. Alone in the sparsely decorated guest room, I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands trembling, slightly as the adrenaline of our confrontation began to ebb. I hadn't planned any of this. The discovery of his potential affair, wearing my old dress, challenging him directly. Yet now that I'd taken these steps, there was no going back. The woman who had meekly accepted his criticism this morning no longer existed. But what now? The question loomed large, filling the quiet room. I couldn't continue living like this, pretending nothing had changed. Yet the prospect of what lay ahead was terrifying. Michael controlled our finances, our social circle, even my professional reputation through his connections. I needed a plan, not an emotional reaction, but a strategic approach to reclaiming my life. I pulled out my phone and opened a new note, typing what I need at the top. Then, methodically, I began to list the essentials. Financial independence. A place to live. Support. System. Legal advice. Personal documents. The list felt overwhelming, yet somehow the act of writing it down made it more manageable. These were concrete problems with practical solutions. I started with what I knew I had, $2,700 in hidden cash. My job at Wonderland Books, which provided a modest but steady income. Claire, who would support me without question. The few treasured possessions in my wooden box. It wasn't much to rebuild a life on, but it was a starting point. Next, I listed what I needed to find out. Did we have a prenuptial agreement? I couldn't remember signing one, but those early days with Michael had been a whirlwind. What legal rights did I have to our joint assets? How could I access important documents like my birth certificate and social security card, which Michael kept in his fireproof safe, for security? My phone buzzed with a text from Claire. Checking in. Everything okay after our talk today? I hesitated, then typed, Not really. Things came to a head with Michael. Can we talk tomorrow? I need advice. Her response was immediate. Absolutely. My place? I can make lunch? Or I can come to you if that's better. Your place, I replied. Noon? I'll be here. Love you, sis. Whatever's happening, we'll figure it out. A wave of gratitude washed over me. Claire had never abandoned me, even when I'd pushed her away to please Michael. She'd kept reaching out, kept trying, never giving up on me even when I'd nearly given up on myself. I continued working on my list, adding specific tasks under each. Category: financial independence. Open a separate bank account. Make appointment with financial advisor. Review credit report, Shark score. Update resume, and look for higher-paying job options, a place to live. Research affordable apartments. Ask Claire about temporary housing options. Get estimates for moving costs. Support system. Reconnect with old friends. Look into support groups for women leaving controlling relationships. Consider therapy options. Legal. Advice. Free consultation with divorce attorney. Learn about Washington state divorce laws. Gather evidence of emotional abuse. Personal documents. Locate birth certificate. Passport. Social security card. Make copies of all important documents. Secure new copies if necessary. As I worked, a strange calm settled over me. This wasn't a rash decision born of a single discovery or argument. It was the culmination of years of suppressed awareness, the final acknowledgement of a truth I'd been hiding from myself. My marriage wasn't just unhappy, it was unhealthy. I heard Michael's office door open, followed by his footsteps in the hallway. He paused outside the guest room door but didn't knock. After a moment, he continued to our bedroom, closing the door with a decisive click. I returned to my planning, adding a crucial category. Safety measures. Change passwords on personal accounts. Get a new phone number when ready to leave. Create a code word with Claire for emergencies. Research how to leave safely. Although Michael had never been physically violent, his reaction to losing control was unpredictable. The way his face had changed tonight when I challenged him, a flash of something cold and unfamiliar, had triggered a primal warning in my gut. I checked the time, 11:30 p.m. Too late to make any concrete moves tonight, but not too late to gather information. I opened a private browsing window and began researching divorce laws in Washington state, taking notes on community property regulations and the typical timeline for proceedings. Next, I searched for women's support organizations in Seattle, finding several that offered free consultations and resources for those leaving controlling relationships. One site offered a checklist for preparing to leave, which closely mirrored my own list but added additional safety considerations hadn't thought of. By 1 a.m., my initial panic had transformed into focused determination. I had a framework for moving forward, not just emotional resolve but practical steps to take. Tomorrow, I would open a separate bank account at a different bank from the one Michael used. I would consult with a lawyer. I would begin quietly, looking for an apartment I could afford on my bookstore salary. I changed out of the vintage dress and into pajamas, carefully rehanging the dress in its garment bag. It had served its purpose tonight, reminding both Michael and myself of who I used to be, who I could be again. As I prepared for bed, I realized I hadn't eaten dinner. The confrontation with Michael had driven all thoughts of food from my mind. I crept to the kitchen, half expecting to find him there, but the space was dark and empty. The bracelet still sat on the counter, its diamonds catching the faint light from the Seattle skyline outside the windows. I made a simple sandwich and ate it standing by those windows, looking out at the city that had been my home for over a decade. Before Michael, I'd lived in a tiny studio apartment in Capitol Hill, surrounded by artists, musicians, and writers. The rent had been high for the small space, but I'd loved the energy of the neighborhood, the feeling of being part of a creative community. Perhaps it was time to return to those roots. Not necessarily to Capitol Hill, which had only grown more expensive over the years, but to a life built around authenticity rather than appearances. My phone buzzed with a calendar notification. Harrington dinner, Saturday 7 p.m. The event Michael had been reminding me about for weeks, where I was expected to wear the approved blue dress and play the role of perfect corporate wife. Without hesitation, I deleted the event from my calendar. Whatever happened in the coming days and weeks, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would not be attending that dinner, would not be performing that role ever again. Back in the guest room, I slipped under the covers, my mind still racing, with plans and possibilities. For the first time in years, the future felt uncertain, yet full of potential rather than dread. The path ahead would be difficult. Extracting myself from this marriage would require courage, strategy, and patience. But the alternative was unthinkable. I could not, would not, continue to disappear. As I drifted toward sleep, I realized I hadn't felt fear during my planning, only a growing sense of purpose. The details might be daunting, but the direction was clear. I was reclaiming my life, one decision at a time. Tomorrow would bring the first tangible steps: a bank account in my name only, a legal consultation, lunch with Claire to solidify my support system. Small moves in a larger strategy, each one taking me closer to freedom. Michael had told me I would never be good enough for someone like him. Now I understood the truth. I had always been too good for what our marriage had become, and it was time, past time, to prove it. I woke the next morning to the sound of Michael moving around the kitchen. For a disorienting moment, I couldn't remember why I was in the guest room. Then the events of the previous night crashed back, the confrontation, my realization, the plans I'd begun making. My phone showed 7:15 a.m. I had to be at the bookstore by 9 bao, but first I needed to navigate this morning with Michael. I listened to the familiar sounds, the coffee grinder, the refrigerator door opening and closing, the soft clink of a spoon against ceramic. The routine sounds of a marriage that was anything but routine now. Taking a deep breath, I rose and put on the robe hanging on the back of the door, one Michael had selected, silk in a muted taupe that he'd deemed elegant. I caught sight of myself in the mirror, noticing how the color washed me out, making me look pale and insubstantial. Just another small way he'd made me less visible. When I entered the kitchen, Michael was seated at the island, scrolling through his phone while sipping coffee. He looked up, his expression carefully neutral. "Good morning," he said, his tone measured. "There's coffee." "Thank you," I replied, pouring myself a cup. The normalcy of the interaction felt surreal after last night's confrontation. "About yesterday," he began, setting down his phone. "I think we both said things in the heat of the moment that we didn't mean." I sipped my coffee, considering my response. This was his standard approach after arguments, suggesting mutual culpability, offering a reset without addressing the underlying issues. "I meant everything I said," I replied quietly. His jaw tightened momentarily before relaxing into a practiced smile. "Elena, I understand you're upset. The photos Claire showed you looked bad out of context. But I've explained it was a business meeting. If you can't trust me, this isn't about the photos," I interrupted, "or even about whether you're having an affair. This is about our entire relationship." He checked his watch, an expensive Swiss timepiece I'd given him for his birthday last year, purchased with the allowance he provided. "I have a deposition at 9. Can we discuss this tonight? I'll make reservations at Maison Laurent." Maison Laurent, the upscale French restaurant he took me to whenever he needed to smooth over a particularly rough patch. The pattern was so transparent now that I could see it. Criticism, conflict, expensive gesture, return to the status quo. "I have plans tonight," I said. He looked genuinely surprised. "What plans?" "Dinner with Claire." "Cancel it," he said automatically. "This is important." In the past, I would have done exactly that. Claire would have understood, she always did. But not today. "No," I said simply. "My relationship with my sister is important too." He stared at me for a moment, clearly recalibrating. "Fine. Tomorrow. Then." I nodded, not committing either way. "Have a good day at work." He studied me for a moment longer, as if trying to identify what had changed, then gathered his briefcase and headed for the door. "We'll get past this, Elena," he said, his hand on the doorknob. "We always do." After he left, I moved quickly. I showered and dressed in one of my more professional outfits, black pants and a deep blue blouse that Michael had reluctantly approved as acceptable for work. I gathered my notes from the previous night, tucking them securely in my purse, alongside the $2,700 from my secret stash. Before leaving, I looked around the condo with fresh eyes. The space was immaculate, expensive, and soulless. A showroom rather than a home. Nothing in it truly reflected me. Even the few photos of us displayed on the bookshelves showed carefully posed moments. Our wedding, a firm holiday party, a charity gala. Not one captured genuine joy or connection. My first stop was Seattle Credit Union, 6 blocks from Wonderland Books. I'd chosen it specifically because Michael banked at First Northwest and would never have reason to cross paths with anyone from this smaller institution. "I'd like to open a checking account," I told the friendly banker who greeted me. "In my name only." 30 minutes later, I left with a new account, a debit card, and my cash deposit safely recorded in a system Michael couldn't access. It was a small step, but it felt momentous, the first concrete action in my plan to reclaim my independence. At Wonderland Books, I arrived 15 minutes late, something that had never happened before. "Everything okay?" Mia asked, her eyes widening slightly at my uncharacteristic tardiness. "Just running some errands," I replied. "Sorry to keep you waiting." "No problem. It's been quiet." She hesitated, then added, "That bracelet yesterday, it was really beautiful." "Yes," I agreed, hanging up my coat. "But some gifts come with too high a price tag, even when they're free." She nodded, a flash of understanding crossing her face. Though we'd never discussed my marriage directly, Mia was observant. She'd seen Michael's controlling behavior during his rare visits to the store, noticed how I changed when he was around. The morning passed in a blur of customers, new shipments, and routine tasks. During a lull, I slipped into my small office and called a number I'd found during my research the night before, Seattle Family Law Partners. "I'd like to schedule a consultation regarding a potential divorce," I said quietly into the phone, the words feeling strange and frightening and liberating, all at once. "We have an opening tomorrow at 3:00 p.m. with Ms. Rodriguez," the receptionist informed me. "There's a $150 consultation fee." "That's fine," I replied, mentally calculating how much would remain from my secret fund after this expense. "I'll take it." I wrote the appointment in my planner, tucking it back into my purse where Michael would never look. Then I texted Claire to confirm our lunch plans. At noon, I left Mia in charge and walked the 6 blocks to Claire's loft in a renovated warehouse building. Unlike Michael's sterile luxury condo, Claire's space was vibrant and personal, filled with her artwork, vintage furniture finds, and plants cascading from macrame hangers. "You're here," she said, embracing me tightly as I entered. "I was so worried after your text." "What happened?" "Over homemade soup and fresh bread, I told her everything. The confrontation with Michael, my late-night planning session, the steps I'd already taken today." "I'm so proud of you," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "And not surprised. The real Elena has been in there all along, just waiting to break free." "I'm terrified," I admitted. "He controls everything. Our money, our social connections. I make enough at the bookstore to survive, but barely. And he'll be furious when he realizes I'm serious." Claire's expression grew serious. "Do you think he might get physical? If he realizes you're leaving?" I considered the question carefully. "I don't think so. His control has always been more insidious, emotional rather than physical. But I can't be certain. He's never been in a situation where he's lost control completely." "Then you need to be careful, extremely careful. Don't confront him again until you're ready to leave for good." She hesitated, then added, "You could stay here, you know. I have the sofa bed." The offer was tempting. To walk away today, to never return to that condo or the man who had systematically dismantled my sense of self. But I knew it wasn't that simple. "I need to do this right," I explained. "Get legal advice, secure my important documents, figure out my financial situation. If I just disappear, he could make things very difficult for me." Claire nodded reluctantly. "I understand. But promise me you'll call if you ever feel unsafe. Day or night. I'll come get you." "I promise." I glanced at my watch. I should get back to the store. "Before you go," Claire said, rising and moving to her studio area, "I want you to have this." She returned with a small canvas, a painting of a woman standing on a cliff edge, arms outstretched toward a vibrant sunrise. "I started it last night after your text. It's not finished, but—" "It's beautiful," I whispered, tracing the bold brushstrokes with my fingertip. "It's you," she said simply, "or who you're becoming again. Keep it hidden from Michael, but look at it when you need strength." I carefully wrapped the small canvas in tissue paper and tucked it into my bag, thanking Claire with another tight hug before heading back to work. The afternoon at the bookstore was busy with a scheduled children's reading event, which helped keep my mind occupied. Between customers, I worked on updating my resume, realizing how much my professional confidence had eroded under Michael's constant minimization of my career. Wonderland Books isn't just a retail job, I reminded myself as I typed. I've managed inventory, staff, events, marketing, and customer relations. I've increased sales by 22% in the past 3 years. These were real accomplishments, regardless of Michael's dismissive characterization of my little hobby job. At 5:30, I received a text from Michael. "Working late. Don't wait up." I stared at the message, wondering if it was true or if he was with the woman from the gallery. Then I realized something startling. I didn't care. His whereabouts no longer mattered to me. What mattered was the space his absence gave me to continue my planning. "Need help closing up?" Mia asked as the last customer left. "Actually," I said, making a spontaneous decision, "would you mind handling it tonight? There's something I need to do." With Mia's agreement, I left the store and walked to a nearby coffee shop with free Wi-Fi. Opening my laptop, I began searching apartment listings. Most were depressingly out of reach on my current salary, but I found a few possibilities. Small studios in less trendy neighborhoods that might work as temporary housing while I got on my feet. I made a list of properties to call about the next day, then moved on to researching divorce attorneys. Seattle Family Law Partners had good reviews, particularly Ms. Rodriguez, who was described as tough but fair and experienced with high-conflict divorces. I wanted someone who wouldn't be intimidated by Michael's legal connections or aggressive tactics. By 7 p.m., my coffee had gone cold and my stomach was growling, but I felt productive. I'd taken real steps today, opened a bank account, scheduled a legal consultation, researched housing options. I was no longer just reacting to Michael's behavior. I was actively creating an exit strategy. I stopped for takeout on the way home. Thai. Food from a restaurant Michael deemed too casual for his sophisticated palate. The small act of defiance felt satisfying as I carried the fragrant bag into the empty condo. I ate at the kitchen island, watching the sunset paint the Seattle skyline in shades of pink and gold. 5 years in this condo, and I'd rarely taken time to truly appreciate the view. Michael had chosen the location for its prestige, not its beauty. After dinner, I continued my preparations. I located our safe, hidden behind a painting in Michael's office, and tried the combination, our wedding date, without success. He must have changed it at some point without telling me. Another reminder of his need for control. I searched for copies of important documents in the filing cabinet instead, finding duplicates of my birth certificate and social security card. I photographed them with my phone and then returned them exactly as I'd found them. I also took photos of our tax returns for the past 3 years, our marriage certificate, and bank statements showing our joint assets. As I worked, I was acutely aware of the strange duality of my situation. On the surface, I was still Michael's wife, still living in his condo, still ostensibly playing by his rules. Yet beneath that facade, I was systematically dismantling the foundations of our life together, preparing for an existence he knew nothing about. It was exhausting, this double life, maintaining a semblance of normalcy while secretly planning my escape. Yet it was also necessary. I wasn't ready for a clean break, not yet. I needed time, resources, and preparation to ensure I could leave safely and securely. I heard Michael's key in the lock just after 10 p.m. I quickly closed the filing cabinet drawer and moved to the living room, picking up a book I'd left on the coffee table and pretending to read. "You're still up," he said, setting down his briefcase. "Just finishing a chapter," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. He loosened his tie, studying me. "How was your day?" "Fine. Busy at the store. How was yours?" "Productive." "The Westbrook deposition went well." He paused, then added, "I made reservations at Maison Laurent for tomorrow night. 8 o'clock. Not a question. A statement." The assumption that I would rearrange my life to accommodate his plans remained unchanged. I have a late meeting with a publisher rep tomorrow, I lied smoothly. I'm not sure when I'll be finished. He frowned. Cancel it. This is important, Elena. So is my job, I replied, closing my book and standing. I'm tired. Good night, Michael. I moved past him toward the guest room, feeling his eyes on my back. This small resistance, refusing to acquiesce to his dinner plans, felt significant in ways he couldn't understand. Each tiny act of independence was strengthening me for the larger break to come. Elena, he called after me, his voice softer now. I miss you. Come back to our bedroom. I paused, my hand on the guest room door. The Michael I'd fallen in love with had been charming, attentive, making me feel like the center of his universe. That version of him would occasionally resurface when he sensed he was losing control. A strategic deployment of affection designed to reel me back in. Not tonight, I said quietly. I need space to think. About us? He pressed. About me? I corrected, and closed the door gently but firmly behind me. In the quiet of the guest room, I added another item to my growing exit strategy. Find my own therapist. Not the one Michael had briefly suggested we see 2 years ago, when I'd become unreasonably emotional about his criticism, a suggestion he'd withdrawn when the therapist had asked too many probing questions about our dynamics. No, I needed someone solely focused on my well-being, someone who could help me rebuild the self-confidence that had been systematically eroded over 5 years. As I prepared for bed, I took out Claire's painting, propping it against the lamp on the nightstand where I could see it. The woman on the cliff, arms outstretched toward the sunrise, reminded me of what I was working toward. Not just an escape from Michael, but a return to myself. A new beginning. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, maintaining the facade at work and home while continuing my preparations, meeting with the divorce attorney, possibly confronting more of Michael's attempts to regain control. But for the first time in years, I felt equal to the task. I was no longer just Michael's shadow. I was Elena, rediscovering her strength day by day. The dual reality was exhausting, but necessary. For now, I would continue the balancing act, outwardly compliant, while inwardly resolute. Each small step was bringing me closer to freedom, to the sunrise awaiting beyond the cliff edge. The following day brought a mix of anxiety and anticipation. I left early for work, avoiding another breakfast confrontation with Michael. He'd sent a text at 6:30 a.m. Dinner reservation confirmed for 8. We'll pick you up at the store. Not a question or invitation, a directive. I hadn't responded. At Wonderland Books, I moved through the morning routine with a strange sense of disconnect. Everything was the same. Unpacking new arrivals, arranging displays, helping customers find the perfect book, yet everything had changed. Each task felt both familiar and foreign, as if I was watching myself perform actions from a life that no longer fit. You seem different today, Mia observed as we restocked the poetry section. More, I don't know, present? I smiled, touched by her perception. Maybe I am. She seemed about to say more when the bells above the door chimed. A tall woman with silver-streaked black hair entered, her confident stride and sharp gaze immediately commanding attention. Vivian, I said, surprised to see the senior partner's wife in my store. In 5 years, she'd visited exactly twice. Both times to purchase books Michael had suggested as appropriate reading for their firm's wives' book club. Elena, she replied, her tone warming slightly. Do you have a moment? Privately? Confused but curious, I led her to my small office, offering her the only chair while I perched on the edge of my desk. I'll be direct, Vivian said once the door closed. I saw Michael with a young woman at the Belltown Gallery last week. It wasn't a business meeting. I stared at her, speechless. Of all the people I might have expected to confirm Michael's infidelity, Vivian Harper, the woman he constantly held up as the epitome of proper corporate wife behavior, was last on my list. "How do you know?" I finally asked. "Because I was there with friends from the Seattle Arts Council." Michael didn't see me, but I watched them for nearly an hour. She paused, her perfectly manicured fingers adjusting the sleeve of her cashmere sweater. "My husband doesn't know I'm here. No one from the firm does." "Why are you telling me this?" She met my gaze directly. "Because 20 years ago, I was you. Different husband, same story. A young woman trying to reshape herself to meet impossible standards, losing herself piece by piece." The admission stunned me. Vivian had always seemed the perfect corporate wife, elegant, reserved, impeccably appropriate, the living embodiment of everything Michael wanted me to be. "But you and Robert seem—" I trailed off, unsure how to finish. "Happy? Perfectly matched?" She smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her typically reserved face. "We are now. But Robert is my second husband. My first was a lot like Michael, controlling, critical, constantly molding me into his ideal while engaging in his own indiscretions." "What happened?" "I left him. It was terrifying and the hardest thing I've ever done. I was 34 with no job, no income of my own, and no idea who I actually was anymore." She leaned forward slightly. "But it was also the most important decision of my life." I swallowed hard, fighting unexpected tears. "Michael says I'll never be good enough for someone like him." "And he's right," Vivian said, surprising me again. "Because you're too good for what he's offering. Too good to be diminished daily, to be treated as an accessory rather than a partner." A tear escaped despite my efforts. Vivian reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a pristine handkerchief, offering it without comment. "I've been planning to leave," I admitted, dabbing at my eyes. "I have a consultation with a divorce attorney this afternoon." She nodded approvingly. "Good. You'll need expert guidance. Michael won't make this easy." "Did your first husband make it easy?" "No," she replied, a shadow crossing her face. "He fought me on everything, used his connections to make it as difficult as possible. But I survived. More than survived. I rebuilt a life that's authentically mine." She reached into her bag again, this time extracting a business card. "This is my personal number. Call me anytime, day or night." I took the card, oddly moved by this unexpected alliance. "Thank you, but why help me? We barely know each other." "Because no one helped me," she said simply. "And because I've watched Michael belittle you at firm events for years, seen you growing smaller in his shadow. I should have reached out sooner." After Vivian left, I sat in my office, processing our conversation. The woman Michael had held up as the perfect example of what a corporate wife should be was actually a survivor who'd rebuilt her life after escaping a controlling marriage. The irony was almost too perfect. At 2:30, I left Mia in charge and took a cab to Seattle Family Law Partners for my consultation with Ms. Rodriguez. The office was smaller than I'd expected, warm and unpretentious compared to Michael's gleaming corporate firm. Camila Rodriguez was a compact woman with keen eyes and a direct manner that immediately put me at ease. "Tell me why you're here, Mrs. Foster," she said once we were seated in her office. "I'm planning to divorce my husband," I replied, the words still strange to say aloud. "I need to understand my options and how to protect myself in the process." For the next hour, I outlined my situation, the emotional control, the financial restrictions, the isolation, and finally, the suspected infidelity. Ms. Rodriguez listened attentively, occasionally making notes, but mostly allowing me to tell my story without interruption. "What you're describing is a pattern of emotional and financial abuse," she said when I finished. "Unfortunately, it's one I see often. The good news is that Washington is a community property state, which means you're entitled to half of all assets acquired during the marriage, regardless of whose name is on the accounts. Even if I signed a prenuptial agreement? I asked, still uncertain whether I had. Did you? I don't remember. Those early days with Michael were a whirlwind. I signed whatever he put in front of me. Ms. Rodriguez's expression tightened. That's concerning. If you did sign a prenup but weren't given proper time to review it or consult with your own attorney, we might be able to challenge its validity. I'll need you to find out for certain if one exists. She continued outlining my options, explaining the difference between contested and uncontested divorces, temporary support orders, and protection orders if necessary. The legal terminology was overwhelming, but her matter-of-fact approach made it manageable. Here's what I recommend, she said as our session concluded. First, secure copies of all financial records, bank statements, investment accounts, property deeds, tax returns. Second, start documenting incidents of controlling behavior, including dates and specific details. Third, build your support network. You'll need emotional reinforcement throughout this process. I nodded, jotting down her recommendations in Taonchin's my notebook. And if he becomes difficult when he realizes I'm serious? We file for a temporary restraining order immediately, she replied without hesitation. Your safety is non-negotiable. I left her office with a retainer agreement and a sense of cautious empowerment. The path ahead would be challenging, but I now had professional guidance to navigate it. My phone showed 3 missed calls from Michael and a text. Confirm you'll be ready at 7:30, wearing the blue dress. Instead of responding, I called Claire. Can you meet me for coffee? I need to talk through some things. 20 minutes later, we sat in a quiet corner of a cafe several blocks from the bookstore. I filled her in on both conversations, Vivian's unexpected support and Ms. Rodriguez's legal advice. This is good, Elena, Claire said, squeezing my hand. You're building a team of people who support the real you, not Michael's version of you. I still feels surreal, I admitted. 3 days ago, I was just going through the motions, accepting his criticism as normal. Now I'm planning a divorce and rebuilding my life. Not rebuilding, Claire corrected. Reclaiming. The life that was always meant to be yours. My phone buzzed again with Michael's name on the screen. I silenced it without answering. He's going to be furious when I don't show up for his dinner tonight, I said. Stay with me, Claire urged. Don't go back to the condo at all. I shook my head. Not yet. I need to gather more documents, make more preparations. Ms. Rodriguez says leaving prematurely could complicate the legal process. I didn't add that part of me was still afraid, not just of Michael's reaction, but of the enormous change I was initiating. Then, at least come to my place after work. We can have dinner, and you can go home late, after he's given up on the restaurant. This seemed like a reasonable compromise. Okay, and would you come with me to get my things when it's time to leave for good? I don't want to be alone with him. Try and stop me, Claire replied fiercely. I'll bring reinforcements too. Mia from the bookstore seems like she'd be good in a crisis. The mention of Mia reminded me that I needed to return to work. As I gathered my things, Claire caught my hand. I'm proud of you, Elena. This isn't just about leaving Michael. It's about finding yourself again. Back at Wonderland Books, I was surprised to find Theo, our regular customer, engaged in animated conversation with Mia. They both looked up as I entered. Elena, Theo exclaimed, just the person we need to settle a literary debate. Would you characterize Heathcliff as a romantic hero or a cautionary tale? I smiled, grateful for the normal interaction after the emotional intensity of the afternoon. Both, I think. He's compelling exactly because he's dangerous, a warning wrapped in romantic packaging. Exactly what I was saying, Mia agreed triumphantly. Betrayed by my favorite bookseller, Theo lamented good-naturedly. And after I brought muffins again, their easy banter reminded me of something I'd nearly forgotten. Life could be light, conversation could be stimulating without being a minefield. Simple human connections could bring joy without judgment or manipulation. As closing time approached, I received another text from Michael. "I've been calling you all day. Where are you? The reservation is in an hour." I finally texted back, "Not feeling well. Having dinner with Claire. We'll be home later." His response was immediate. "Cancel with Claire. I'll pick up soup on my way to get you." The old Elena would have acquiesced, apologized to Claire, and dressed for dinner despite feeling ill. The emerging Elena wrote back, "Already promised Claire. Don't wait up for me." Then I turned off my phone completely, an act that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. For the first time in our marriage, I had directly refused a clear directive from Michael. As Mia and I closed the store, I found myself telling her, "I might need some extra help in the coming weeks. Personal things might complicate my schedule." She studied me for a moment, then asked carefully, "Does this have anything to do with your husband and that bracelet he sent?" "Yes," I admitted. "I'm making some changes in my personal life." "Good changes?" "Necessary ones." She nodded decisively. "Whatever you need, Elena. Extra shifts, coverage for appointments, an alibi, a getaway driver. I'm your girl." I laughed, surprised and touched by her immediate support. "How did you know?" "My mom went through something similar when I was in high school," she explained, locking the front door. "I recognize the signs, and I've seen how you change when your husband is around. Smaller somehow, more careful. Another person who had seen what I hadn't been able to acknowledge myself." "Thank you," I said simply. "It means more than you know." Over. Dinner at Claire's loft, surrounded by her artwork and vibrant energy, I felt another piece of myself click back into place. We talked about everything and nothing. Books we'd loved as teenagers, our parents, Claire's upcoming gallery showing, my favorite customers at the bookstore. Not once did I monitor my tone, moderate my laughter, or second-guess my opinions. "You know what I just realized?" I said as we washed dishes side by side. "This is the first conversation I've had in years where I'm not constantly editing myself." Claire handed me a plate to dry. "That's because I love the unedited Elena. Always have." "I'm starting to remember her myself," I admitted. By the time I returned to the condo, past 11 p.m., my phone still turned off. The lights were dim and Michael's bedroom door was closed. I slipped quietly into the guest room, relieved to avoid a confrontation, but knowing it was only postponed, not prevented. As I prepared for bed, I reflected on the day's conversations, with Vivian, with Ms. Rodriguez, with Claire, with Mia. Each of them had offered different kinds of support: legal guidance, shared experience, unconditional love, practical assistance. Together, they formed a safety net I hadn't realized was possible, a counterbalance to Michael's isolating influence. I took out Claire's painting again, propping it against the lamp where I could see it from bed. The woman on the cliff edge, arms outstretched toward the sunrise, seemed to embody what I was discovering. I wasn't alone in this journey. There were hands reaching back to help me, voices encouraging me forward, wisdom lighting the path ahead. For 5 years, Michael had systematically cut me off from meaningful connections, positioning himself as the sole arbiter of my worth. But, in just 3 days of awakening, I'd discovered a network of support waiting to help me reclaim my life. Some, like Claire, had been there all along, patiently waiting. Others, like Vivian and Ms. Rodriguez, were new allies with valuable perspective. Together, they formed a lifeline pulling me toward shore. With their help, I was beginning to believe I could not only leave Michael, but thrive without him. The journey ahead would be difficult, the confrontations painful, the adjustments challenging. But for the first time, I wasn't facing it alone. I fell asleep with this comforting thought: Claire's painting watching over me, a visual reminder that every sunset eventually gives way to sunrise. The morning after I'd missed Michael's carefully planned dinner, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing insistently. I'd turned it back on before falling asleep, half expecting a barrage of missed calls and texts. Instead, there had been only silence, more concerning than anger in its uncharacteristic restraint. Now, at 6:15 a.m., Claire's name lit up my screen. "He was here," her message read, "at the gallery, asking questions about you, about your plans. He seemed calm, but something felt off. Call me when you're up." A chill ran through me. Michael never visited Claire's gallery. He considered her art derivative and amateur. That he had sought her out, presumably after I'd failed to come home for his scheduled dinner, signaled a shift in tactics. I slipped out of bed and moved quietly to the door, listening for sounds of Michael's morning routine. The condo was silent. I opened the door a crack and peered into the hallway. His bedroom door stood open, the room beyond empty, the bed unslept in. Had he not come home at all? The thought was both relieving and unsettling. I dressed quickly in clothes I could move freely in, jeans, a sweater, comfortable boots, and gathered my purse and phone. Whatever confrontation was coming, I wanted to meet it on my terms, not caught off guard in pajamas. The living room and kitchen were empty, the apartment unnaturally quiet without Michael's news podcasts playing or coffee brewing. On the counter sat a small velvet box, not the bracelet he'd sent to the store, but something new. Beside it lay a handwritten note in his precise script. "Elena, I've given us both space to reconsider recent events. I'll be at the Harrington dinner Saturday evening as planned. I expect you'll be there as well, wearing the enclosed. We can begin again from there." Inside the velvet box gleamed a pair of diamond earrings that must have cost thousands, his largest guilt gift yet. The implicit message was clear. Accept these, attend the dinner, resume your role, and we'll pretend the past week never happened. I set the box down, feeling strangely calm. The expensive gesture that once would have intimidated me into compliance now seemed desperate and sad, the only language of reconciliation he knew. My phone buzzed with another text from Claire. "Are you okay? Should I come over?" "I'm fine," I replied. "He's not here. Meeting you for coffee in 30? I took advantage of Michael's absence to move quickly through the condo, gathering essentials I'd identified during my planning. Important documents, irreplaceable mementos, the cash from my hidden stash. I packed everything into a small weekend bag and tucked it behind the couch, ready for a hasty exit if necessary. At the corner cafe where Claire waited, her face tight with concern, I filled her in on the earrings and note. "The Harrington dinner," she repeated, frowning. "That's tomorrow night?" I nodded. "The biggest social event of his firm's year. All the partners, major clients, their wives, the perfect stage for him to display his perfect, compliant wife." "You're not going, obviously." "No," I agreed. "But that's when I'm moving out. While he's at the dinner, expecting me to show up in a contrite blue dress and new diamonds." Claire's eyes widened. "You've decided then? For sure?" "For sure," I confirmed, the certainty settling into my bones. "Ms. Rodriguez helped me prepare the initial paperwork yesterday. I've found a small apartment near the bookstore. Nothing fancy, but it's month to month with no credit check. I can move in tomorrow." "What about your things?" "I only want what's truly mine. The items from before Michael, a few clothes, books, nothing that reminds me of these past 5 years." Claire reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "I'm so proud of you. But Elena, what about when he comes home from the dinner and finds you gone? He'll be furious." "The divorce papers will be waiting for him," I said calmly, along with a note from Ms. Rodriguez warning him against any contact with me outside legal channels. "And I won't be alone. Mia and her boyfriend are helping me move. Vivian even offered security from her husband's firm if needed." "You've really thought this through." "I've had to. I replied. It's the only way I'll actually break free. After coffee, I headed to Wonderland Books, finding comfort in the familiar routine of opening the store, arranging displays, helping customers. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Did you receive my note? The earrings are Cartier. Thought of you when I saw them. I stared at the message, recognizing the familiar pattern. Criticism followed by expensive gift, followed by expected gratitude and compliance. For the first time, I saw it clearly for what it was. Not love, not even remorse, but a transaction. My continued submission in exchange for material compensation. I didn't respond. The third message came at 3 p.m. I've been patient with your recent behavior, but this silent treatment is childish and beneath you. We have an image to maintain. The Harrington dinner is crucial for my partnership track. I turned off my phone entirely, focusing instead on finalizing details for tomorrow's move. Mia had arranged a small truck through her boyfriend. Claire had gathered boxes. My new apartment would be ready for key pickup at noon. When I returned to the condo that evening, I half expected to find Michael waiting, but the space remained empty. His absence felt strategic rather than coincidental, giving me space not out of respect, but as a calculated move to make me miss his presence, to create anxiety about his return. I used the time to pack systematically, focusing only on items that held genuine meaning. The wooden box of treasures, my collection of first edition books, a few pieces of clothing I'd loved before Michael deemed them inappropriate, family photos. Everything else, the designer clothes he'd selected, the expensive accessories that never felt like me, the tasteful decor that bore no trace of my personality, I left behind. By midnight, several small boxes and a single suitcase contained the sum total of what I wanted to carry into my new life. I placed them beside the weekend bag behind the couch, then went to the guest room to sleep one final night in the condo that had never truly been my home. Morning brought a sense of calm, resolution. Today was the day. After 5 years of diminishment, of trying to contort myself into Michael's ideal, I was choosing myself. The realization felt both terrifying and exhilarating. I turned my phone back on to find a dozen missed calls and a series of increasingly frustrated texts from Michael, culminating in, "This behavior is unacceptable. I've made allowances for your emotional nature, but my patience has limits. I expect you at the Harrington dinner tonight, 7 p.m. sharp. The car will pick you up at 6:30. Wear the blue dress and the earrings. We'll discuss your recent attitude afterward." The commanding tone that once would have sent me scrambling to comply now struck me as almost comically impotent. He was issuing orders into a void, to a woman who no longer existed. I spent the morning at the bookstore, finalizing arrangements with Mia and handling the weekend rush of customers. At noon, I met the property manager at my new apartment, a small but sunny studio in an older building 6 blocks from Wonderland Books. The space was basic but clean, with large windows and worn hardwood floors. Nothing like Michael's luxury condo, but it was mine alone. "Key works?" the manager asked as I unlocked the door. "Perfectly," I replied, feeling the weight of the simple metal in my palm, a tangible symbol of my independence. By 2 p.m., Claire had arrived at the condo to help me move. Mia and her boyfriend Jake followed with the small truck, and we began loading my meager possessions. "That's everything?" Jake asked, looking at the handful of boxes and single suitcase. "That's everything that matters," I confirmed. As we prepared to leave, I took one final walk through the space that had been my prison for 5 years. The gleaming kitchen where I'd prepared countless meals to Michael's exacting specifications. The living room where I'd sat silent during his business dinners, speaking only when prompted. The bedroom where I'd gradually surrendered my identity for the sake of peace. On the counter, I left 3 items: the diamond earrings, my wedding ring, and a sealed envelope containing divorce papers and Ms. Rodriguez's business card. No note, no explanation. The items spoke for themselves. "Ready?" Claire asked gently, touching my arm. I nodded, taking a deep breath. Ready. As our small caravan pulled away from the luxury high-rise, I didn't look back. The sensation of leaving was not what I'd expected, not grief or fear or even relief, but something closer to clarity. The fog that had surrounded me for years was lifting, allowing me to see the road ahead with newfound sharpness. My new apartment took less than an hour to set up. Claire had brought housewarming gifts, bright throw pillows, a handmade quilt, a small potted plant, infusing the space with warmth and color. Mia contributed a stack of advance reader copies from the bookstore, and Jake installed new locks on the door, just to be safe. As evening fell, I knew Michael would be arriving at the Harrington dinner, expecting me to appear in the blue dress and new earrings, prepared to play my role after being suitably chastised for my recent defiance. When I didn't show, he would be initially angry, then increasingly concerned as his calls went unanswered. Eventually, he would return to the condo to find my wedding ring and the divorce papers waiting. "Will you be okay here alone tonight?" Claire asked as the others prepared to leave. "You could still stay with me." "I'll be fine," I assured her. "Ms. Rodriguez filed a temporary restraining order yesterday as a precaution. If Michael shows up here, I call the police immediately." "And you'll keep your phone on? Text me every hour?" "Promise," I said, hugging her tightly. But really, I think he'll be too shocked to do anything tonight. The real challenge will come when he recovers and starts fighting the divorce. After they left, I stood in the center of my new home, absorbing the silence. Unlike the sterile quiet of Michael's condo, this silence felt alive with possibility. For the first time in 5 years, I was answerable only to myself. My time, my space, my choices belonged to me alone. I made tea in the mismatched mug Claire had brought and curled up in the window seat overlooking the street below. Ordinary people moved through their evening routines, walking dogs, carrying takeout, hurrying to meet friends. Soon I would be just another anonymous figure in this urban tapestry. No longer Michael Foster's carefully curated wife, but simply Elena, rediscovering her authentic self day by day. My phone buzzed. Not Michael, but Vivian. Just checking that everything went as planned. Robert mentioned Michael arrived at the Harrington dinner alone, looking tense. "Are you safely relocated?" "All moved in," I replied. "Thank you again for your support." "Stay strong," she texted. Back. "The coming weeks will be challenging, but worth it. Call anytime." Around 10 p.m., the inevitable happened. My phone exploded with notifications, calls, texts, voicemails from Michael. I didn't read or listen to any of them, following Ms. Rodriguez's explicit instructions. No contact outside legal channels. Instead, I opened my old sketchbook, the one I'd kept hidden from Michael, and for the first time in years, began to draw without self-consciousness or fear of criticism. The lines flowed freely, creating an image of a woman standing in the open doorway of a small apartment, light spilling around her as she gazed toward distant horizons. My phone continued to buzz intermittently throughout the night, but its urgency diminished as the hours passed. By morning, the notifications had stopped entirely, replaced by a single email from Ms. Rodriguez. "He's retained counsel. Buckley and Walsh, proceeding as discussed. Stay the course." The battle was just beginning. Michael would use every resource at his disposal, financial, legal, social, to regain control or punish me for escaping it. The coming months would bring challenges I could barely anticipate. Yet as I prepared for my first day of work as a truly independent woman, I felt a quiet confidence growing within me. Michael had told me I would never be good enough for someone like him. In leaving, I had finally understood the truth. I had always been too good for what our marriage had become, too complex to be reduced to an accessory. too vibrant to be muted into background decoration, too human to be molded into someone else's ideal. 1 month after Michael had delivered those cruel words in our kitchen, I stood in my own space, surrounded by my own choices, embarking on a life that was authentically, imperfectly mine. The journey ahead would be challenging, but I was no longer walking it alone. Claire, Mia, Vivian, Ms. Rodriguez, a constellation of support illuminating my path forward. As I locked my apartment door and headed to the bookstore, I realized something profound. In losing the life Michael had constructed for me, I had found myself again. And that rediscovered self, with all her strengths and flaws and boundless potential, was the most precious possession of all. Michael had been wrong about so many things, but perhaps most fundamentally about this. True worth isn't measured by how well we conform to others' expectations, but by how bravely we honor our own authentic nature. And by that measure, I was already more than enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.